All right, Daniel chapter 6. As I said, tonight is the last night in our Boldness in Babylon series. We're going to be looking at Daniel, the character, just one more time. And we're going to see probably the most popular story in Daniel. We're going to be looking at the story of Daniel and the lion's den. Here's what I don't want you to do. I don't want you to say, okay, I've been in church since I was still in my mother's womb, so I've heard this story probably 333,000 times. Don't do that and then zone out. Instead, I want us to come at this story with fresh eyes. I want us to look at the story of Daniel and the lion's den and just realize how insane this story is. Because there is so much in this story that can absolutely blow our minds, but we become so numb to it because we have heard it so many times. And if that's you, I'm right there with you. As I was getting ready to teach it, I walked into the passage thinking, oh man, okay, I already know all this. I'll point to this, I'll point to this, I'll point to this. And then as I sat down with the word, God gave me fresh eyes to be blown away by what's in his word. And I pray that tonight, as we open the word, he would give you those same eyes, that you would be blown away by the way that God shows up, because it's incredible. So, if you're taking notes, the title of tonight's lesson is this. It is Persistence in Persecution. Persistence in Persecution. We've been talking a lot about what it looks like to live lives that are faithful to God when we live in a culture that pushes against our faith. What we're going to see tonight is Daniel, the kingdom that he's been in, Babylon, is going to be taken over by another kingdom. And this kingdom is going to continue to push against his faith just the same as Babylon did. If you haven't been here the last few weeks, let me summarize the story of Daniel for you. In Daniel chapter 1, we see four guys: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. These four guys are basically nobility in Jerusalem, in the nation of Israel, and they are taken off into exile. They go into the land of Babylon because the Babylonians came in, they beat them in war, and they take them into their land. And essentially, their new identity is you will serve Babylon and Babylon's gods. This becomes their entire identity, their entire purpose is to serve Babylon and Babylon's gods. And Babylon was constantly pushing against Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah's God. God gives us in his word specific expectations for the way that we will live. And Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah devoted themselves to his word. But the culture that they lived in didn't agree. And so it was constantly pushing against them. And so time after time after time, what we've seen is these guys have chosen that when it costs them something, even if it costs them everything, their loyalty is to God and God alone. So they choose faithfulness to God over comfort in the new culture. And every single time, God shows up and he makes himself known because these guys were willing to stand firm for the things that God had called them to do. Well, now another kingdom has come in. Let me give you some context just to fill in some of the gaps. It's kind of insane what happens between Daniel chapter 3 and Daniel chapter 6 from last week to this week. So if I would summarize it, here's what I would say. Super brief history lesson. So Nebuchadnezzar died after ruling Babylon for 43 years. Then his son, named Amel Marduk, ruled for 2 years. Then he was assassinated by his brother-in-law, Neriglissar. Then Neriglissar came and he ruled for 4 years, and then he died naturally. Good for him. Then his young son, Labashi Marduk, reigned for just a few months before he was killed by a bunch of people who rioted against him. Then the people who rioted put in a new guy into power named Nabonidus. Nabonidus was put in the kingship, and he reigned for 17 years. Then, while Nabonidus was king, he was like, well, I don't really love being here, so I'm going to go and build myself a palace out in the desert area, and I'm going to put my son in to just be over everything. And this son's name is Belshazzar. Okay? Belshazzar is who is referred to as the king in Daniel chapter 5. Belshazzar was extremely wicked. Belshazzar came in and he ruled for just a little bit. And when he came in, he would do some wild things. There was one night that Belshazzar threw this giant party. He brings in all the nobilities, and he's trying to show off just how powerful and how awesome he is. So he brings all these people into this big banquet hall, and they have a feast. People are getting drunk. People are doing crazy things all around the room. It's getting insane. Then Belshazzar is like, oh, guys, check this out. And he calls for the servants to go and get all the gold cups, plates, all the articles, all the dishes that were in the temple in Jerusalem, the place where God's presence resided. I want you to go and get those things and bring them in here, and we're going to feast with them. It was basically him calling out God and just being like, man, you're lame. I beat you. And they threw this big party. They're super drunk. And then what happens? A giant hand appears out of nowhere and starts writing on the wall. Okay? That's insane. But it writes some words. It's like, meanie, tekel parson. Those 4 words in some order. And essentially, here's what it means. Nobody understands it, so they call in Daniel. Daniel is able to understand these things. He's got this kind of reputation in the kingdom. So they call in Daniel, and Daniel's like, Belshazzar, guess what? Your time is limited. You need to repent because you have defied the living God. Your time is limited. Well, Belshazzar continues to party. The party goes home. Belshazzar goes home, gets in bed, and he dies that night. An empire called the Medo-Persian Empire comes in, destroys Belshazzar, and basically takes over. At the end of Daniel chapter 5, a guy named Darius is given the kingdom. Okay? The Medo-Persian Empire is this. There is the Medes, and then there's the Persians. The Persians are the bigger army, but they come together with the Medes, and they're like, hey, let's do this together, and they go and they like destroy the whole world together, I guess. And so basically, King Cyrus, king of the Persians, he's like, Darius, the Mede, I'm going to put you in charge of Babylon while I go and take care of all these other things. So the king that we're going to see tonight in Daniel chapter 6 is Darius the Mede. There's your history lesson. Let's take a second to talk about lions, because lions are much more fun to talk about. Anybody up for lions? Anybody like lions? Yeah. Lions are terrifying. I don't know if you've ever seen one in person. They're terrifying. Now, I'm not talking about like when you go to the zoo and it's like they're down in their pit and you're like, haha, small lions, like you're lame. You can't get me up here. No, I'm talking like when you're face to face with a lion, it's terrifying. Would you throw that picture up there? So this is, I don't know what to call it. It's like a truck, a Jeep thing. It's a safari truck. Okay, so let me tell you the story. A year and a half ago, I went to South Africa in a really tiny country called Lesotho. When we went on this trip, we were traveling from Johannesburg, South Africa, into Lesotho. And on our way there, it was like a 12-hour drive, so we stopped halfway and we went on a safari. It was awesome. But we went, this is like right before the sun started going down, and this is right when we started. But we were out there for like 4 hours. So the sun goes down, and, we're out in the, African savannah, so there's no, street lights out there. So it's really dark. Basically, we had gone out to go see all kinds of animals. There were rhinoceroses, there were hippopotamuses, there were, I basically just hit that Christmas song. That's awesome. There were meerkats, there were, this was the crazy one. There were cheetahs, but here's the crazy part about the cheetahs. So basically, the cheetahs were like traveling at night, and it's like super pitch black outside, but they didn't want to scare the cheetahs, so they used a red flashlight instead of a regular flashlight, so that obviously makes everything more terrifying, because when you see a cheetah just staring at you, and it's like red light, it looks like a horror movie. So then we're like riding up, and they're like terrified by the cheetahs, and like they're like, we don't want to scare them, so they turn the lights off, and the cheetah is like 10 feet away from the car, and I'm sitting like right next to it, and I don't know if you can tell, there's no windows, so a cheetah is just like 10 feet away from me, and I'm like, yep. This is it. I'm dead. I'm dead. Because you just hear a little rustling, like 10 feet away, and it's terrifying. Anyway, it is terrifying, yes. So one of the things that we saw while we were out there is lions. And they're huge. These things are terrifying. You look at them, and, when we went out there, one was feasting on what's called a springbok, which is basically like a South African deer. If anybody in South Africa saw that, I'm sorry. Don't judge me. But it's like a South African deer. So there's like dead South African deer on the ground, and the lion's just like going crazy. This thing is huge, and it's powerful. Its jaws can crush like bones with like one swoop, and it's not even trying. It's just like, oh, you're dead, okay? These things are insane. We come to this story of Daniel in the lion's den so often, and we're so used to this story that it's like, oh yeah, God protected him from the lions. Yeah, hooray. But guys, think about it. There are hungry lions in a pit, and an 80-year-old man is thrown into them. He obviously cannot fight back, and God protects this guy. God shuts the mouths of the lions in order to protect him from danger. If you're taking notes, here's what I want you to see. The key focus of tonight's lesson is this: faithfulness to God does not prevent persecution, but it positions us for God's glory. Faithfulness to God does not prevent persecution, but it positions us for God's glory. Daniel tonight is going to choose to live faithfully to God, and persecution is going to take place against him. But what we're going to see is that persecution was required in order for God to be glorified. I'm going to leave the key focus up there, and I'm going to read our first section of verses. We'll go to point number 1 in a minute. But if you got your Bibles, Daniel chapter 6, verse 1, it says this: It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps. That's like officials over the kingdom. He splits the kingdom into 120 sections to be throughout the whole kingdom. And over them, 3 high officials. So there's 3 guys over 120 guys, to whom these satraps should give an account so that the king might suffer no loss. Then this Daniel became distinguished among all the other high officials and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. So Daniel is one of those 3 that's over the 120. And the king sees Daniel and says he has an excellent spirit in him. We'll talk about what that means in a minute. But essentially, he's going to put Daniel over the entire kingdom. This guy who is an Israelite, who's been conquered twice, is now about to become basically king over all the people that were in Babylon. Verse 4, Then the high officials and satraps sought to find ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom, but they could find no ground for complaint or any fault, because he was faithful, and no error or fault was found in him. Then these men said, We shall not find any ground for complaint against Daniel unless we find it in connection with his God. So, let's stop right there. First, I want us to see that he has an excellent spirit. What does that mean? It means that Daniel had a good attitude. He did his work well. A lot of times when we go into our schools, when we go into our jobs, it's like, oh, this doesn't really have eternal value, so it's really not that important. But the reality is that Daniel was put in a position that he was in, and he was recognized by the people around him because he did hard work, because he performed well, because he was intentional, because he was honest. He did well what God had entrusted to him. And he was a good representation of God in all those circumstances. Living according to God's standards makes us people that others take notice of. He was well-liked, and so he was put in a position of authority. Now, the high officials, just like some of the guys that we saw last week in chapter 3, they look at Daniel and they're like, this guy should be our slave. We conquered him. In fact, he's been conquered twice. Why in the world would he be put over the entire kingdom? So they don't like Daniel. So they come up with a plan. Well, let's find some way to get him in trouble with King Darius so that he doesn't get to be in charge of us. By the way, if you're taking notes, point number 1 is this. Throw it up there. Settled faith. We're going to see that Daniel has settled faith as he encounters this circumstance, but they come up with this plan. They're going to watch him, and they're going to find some way to get him in trouble. But they can't. They try for days, and they can't figure out any way to get Daniel in trouble because he's a hard worker, because he's honest. So they realize the only way that we can get him in trouble is if we would pit the kingdom against his God. Let me ask you, do people recognize that about you? That your relationship with God is the one unshakable part of your identity? More than your talents, more than your achievements, more than your reputation. What is the one unshakable piece of your identity? Is it your relationship with Jesus? And do other people see that? So how do they respond? Verse 6, let's look at their plan. Then these high officials and the satraps, they came by agreement to the king, and they said to him, O King Darius, live forever. All the high officials and the satraps, the counselors and the governors, were all agreed. All of us came together. We talked about this last night. And we came up with this idea that you, as the king, should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction that whoever makes petition to any god or man for 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Therefore, King Darius signed the document and the injunction. So, this is their plan. They're going to pit the kingdom against God. And so here's what they do. They come and they butter up King Darius, and they're like, King Darius, you're the center of everything. You're the greatest king there's ever been. You know what? You're the provider for everybody in the kingdom. You're the one who protects them. You're the one who takes care of everybody. I think the subjects of the kingdom need to see that. So here's what we think that you should do in order to show them that. You need to make a law that if anyone goes and prays to any god aside from you, if anyone goes and asks any favors of anybody except to you, if anybody offers thanksgiving to anybody except to you, they should be thrown into the den of lions. Because you're worthy of everything. And King Darius is like, hey, that sounds pretty good. I like credit. I like feeling good. It made him feel powerful. And so what does he do? Honestly, he doesn't think through it very much. He goes for it. He signs the injunction. He likes the sound of their plan, but here's an important thing to understand about rules and regulations and laws that are put in place in Medo-Persian empires. In the Medo-Persian Empire, if a king makes a decree, he speaks for the gods. So if he's to go back and change his mind, if he's to go back and change his law after he's put it into place, then he's revealing to everybody either, one, the gods make a mistake, which the people understood that they didn't, or two, I don't speak for the gods. Those are the only two options. So when he puts a law into place, he's supposed to be speaking for the gods, so he can't change things. So how does Daniel respond? They put this into effect, 30 days. Nobody can pray to any god. No one can ask anything except of the king. Look with me at verse 10. Here's how Daniel responds. It says, when Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went into his house, where he had windows in the upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day, and he prayed and gave thanks before his God as he had done previously. Nothing changed. For Daniel, when he heard about the decree, he did the same thing that he had done every day previous. He went home and he prayed. Not only that, he found reasons to give thanks to his God. He gave thanks even though he knew, oh man, yeah, if they see me doing this, I'm going to be thrown into the den of lions. 80-year-old man, lions, doesn't really work out very well for the 80-year-old man. And he knows this. And yet, he goes home, he gets on his knees, and he prays. But Daniel's high position of leadership in the empire is now being put at stake. He was a high leader, about to be made second only to the king. So his opportunity is right in front of him. And he's staring it in the face. And he looks at it and he says, oh man, okay, I can have that if I don't do this thing, if I don't go and pray. Oh, you know what? It's only 30 days. I'll come back to God after that. Or I'll just pray in my head. It'll be quiet. Nobody will know. It's okay. Because this is important. This is really good. God would want me to have this. No. What does he do? He goes home. He gets down on his knees. And he prays. Why? Because even when it cost him something, his loyalty is to God first. His allegiance was always to God first. I want you to write this down. To be a Christian is to agree that your allegiance is to God first. To claim the name of Jesus over your life is to say that no matter what it costs me, no matter the opportunities I'm going to lose, my allegiance is to God first. So what he says in his word is what I'm going to do, even if it costs me friendships, even if it costs me a relationship, even if it costs me a job, even if it costs me a scholarship, even if it costs me friend groups, even if it costs me a grade, no matter what, if it doesn't align with what God says, I'm going to choose my allegiance to God first. As I was studying this, one commentator said this. He said, some people would consider it risky for Daniel to go home, get on his knees, and pray. But the reality is that Daniel understood that going home, getting down on his knees, and praying was the safest thing for him to do. Why? Because obedience to God, the center of God's will, is the safest place for you. When we live in obedience to God, sure, physically, it might not be the best for us. Relationally, it might cause some tension. But what actually matters? Things of eternal value. Our allegiance to God is on the line, and so choosing our allegiance to God above everything else is the safest and the best thing for us. This is the Christian profession. If you claim to be Christian, then this is what you are agreeing to, that when it costs you something, your loyalty is to God first. Your loyalty is to God first. Again, Daniel doesn't know back 70 years ago when he's brought into Babylon, he doesn't know that in this moment he's going to be faced with a den of lions or to be basically king over the kingdom. Like, those two options, kind of insane. He never would have believed it. But he's put in this moment now where he's got to choose. Am I going to be faithful to God and take the den of lions, or am I going to compromise and continue to be comfortable and take the kingdom? He's faced with this situation, but again, he had a settled faith. But faith, when it's settled, it costs us something. Point number 2, costly faith. Look with me at verse 11. Then these men, they came by agreement, and they found Daniel making petition and plea before his God. They're like sitting outside his window with binoculars, waiting to see him fall on his knees and pray. And if they had cameras back then, they would have taken pictures so that they could take it to Darius. So they write down, they basically sketch a picture, and they're like, all right, that's Daniel on his knees. So, verse 12. Then they came near, and they said to the king concerning the injunction, O king, didn't you sign an injunction that anyone who makes petition to any god or man within 30 days except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? And the king answered, and he said, the thing stands fast according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which can't be revoked. So they come in, and they're like, all right, king, just making sure. You remember that law that we set in place yesterday that you signed? Yeah? Okay, and what's the penalty if people don't listen to that? They're going to be thrown into the den of lions. What about it? Verse 13. They answered and they said before the king, Daniel, who's one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or the injunction that you have signed. But he makes his petition 3 times a day. They make sure nobody's outside of these rules, and then they point to Daniel, and they're like, oh, this guy, your like most prized possession? Yeah, he's breaking your rules. Guess he's got to go to the lions. How does he respond? How does King Darius respond? Verse 14. Then the king, when he heard these words, he was much distressed. And he set his mind to deliver Daniel. I want to compare that to what Nebuchadnezzar responded last week in Daniel chapter 3, whenever he finds out that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego aren't bowing to his idol. In Daniel chapter 3, verse 13, it says, when Nebuchadnezzar heard this, he, in a furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought to him. But Darius is distressed. He cares for Daniel. He sees Daniel's benefit to the kingdom. He sees Daniel, and he recognizes he's innocent, so what does he do? Verse 14, and he labored until the sun went down to rescue him. Then these men came by agreement to the king, and they said, you know, O king, that it is a law of the Medes and the Persians that no injunction or ordinance that the king establishes can be changed. Then the king, he commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. The king declared to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you. And a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den. And the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace, and he spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. So their plan works perfectly. Daniel is thrown into the lion's den. But I want to point out, we haven't gotten a single word from Daniel yet. Daniel doesn't freak out. Daniel doesn't get angry. Doesn't He doesn't cry out for injustice. He doesn't point at the faults of these other people. He doesn't fight against it. He doesn't defend himself. Instead, he was like, yep, I'm guilty. I went and I got on my knees and I prayed. 3 times today, actually. You want to throw me in the den 3 more times? He owned it. He wasn't ashamed of his obedience to God. We talked about that a lot last week. Is we are called to stand firm in our obedience to God. When God calls us to do something, we don't hide in the shadows, ashamed of the fact that it's like, oh yeah, I know I should do this. Instead, we stand boldly. We stand firmly and we say, I understand that what God says in his word gives me life, and so I stake my life on this. I will live this way. He wasn't ashamed of his obedience. He had the same mentality of the boys last week when they said, we believe that our God can save us, our God will save us, but even if he doesn't, we're only committed to him. I want to point out, we know how the story ends. Daniel's safe. Daniel has no idea when he's been being thrown into the lion's den that he's going to be safe. He can have belief, he can have faith that God can and God will, but the reality is that's always followed up with even if he doesn't. Daniel's life could have ended right then and right there. 80-year-old man, pack of hungry lions. Doesn't look good for Daniel. And in addition to this, it would have made sense for Daniel to probably be afraid. A lot of us, we have this mentality that living by faith means that we're never afraid, but I want to put to you, that's not the reality. We can be afraid at times, but living by faith is choosing obedience to God even when we are afraid. You might think sometimes that when you're afraid of things, it's like, oh, I can't feel afraid. I gotta be bold. I gotta overcome this fear. No, guys, you're going to experience fear. But living by faith is saying, I feel fear about this. I recognize that this could end poorly for me if I choose allegiance to God, but I'm gonna do it anyway. Why? Because choosing to live for God has so much better results for me. It pushes so much further than the next 3 years. It pushes so much further than the next 10 years, 15 years, 30 years, 50 years. It pushes on and on and on into eternity, but we don't even do it for that purpose. We do it out of love for God. We see what he's done for us, and it's like, man, I owe him everything in response. I love him so much because I understand what he did for me. So even though it's going to cost me something, I don't care. I'm going to do what he's called me to do, even when I'm afraid. So he receives the punishment. So what happens? Verse 19. Then, at the break of day, all night Daniel's in the lion's den. At the break of day, the king rose, and he went in haste to the den of lions. As he came near to the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish, and the king declared, O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? I want to pause there. This is a crazy verse to me, and it is powerful. Look at the king's declaration. He doesn't ask, Daniel, did you survive? That's not what he says. He says, has your God, whom you serve continually, delivered you? First, in both of his dealings with Daniel, both in verse 16 and now in verse 20, he points out that Daniel continually serves God. But here's the thing. Darius stakes Daniel's safety on his God. Darius doesn't even follow Daniel's God. But Daniel is so verbal about his God, he's so verbal about his faith, that when he comes and asks if he's still alive, he says, did your God protect you? Not just did you survive. It's not just that Daniel had once told Darius about this other God that he served, but instead that Daniel was clear that this was his God and this God was his identity. What would happen if we were so vocal about our faith that we aren't the only ones who have expectancy for God to show up, that can walk into the difficult situations that we're facing and other people be around us saying, man, I wonder if their God is going to show up. What would happen if we were willing to talk openly about the difficult things that we're facing, about the scary circumstances, about the things that are going on at home, about the personal sin struggles that we're dealing with? What would happen if we were willing to be open about the hard things in life and say, but God is here, but I'm expecting God to show up? Not I'm expecting God to make all this perfect, but I'm excited to see how God is going to show up and reveal himself through this. What if we were verbal about that? And the people around us who don't currently follow our God, they respond just like Darius, that when we walk through these things and we survive the hard things that we face, they come to us and they ask, how did your God show up? Not just did you make it? Not just I'm glad you made it through. Tell me what your God did. What if we're so verbal about God that the people that don't even believe in him have expectancy that he's going to show up in our lives? How insane would that be? How incredible would that be? How does Daniel respond? Look at verse 21. Daniel answered and he said to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and he shut the lions' mouths. And they have not harmed me because I was found blameless before him. And also before you, O king, I've done no harm. Then the king was exceedingly glad, and he commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the lion's den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found on him because he had trusted in his God. God showed up, and Daniel gave all the glory to him. He recognized, yes, I'm innocent, but he gives credit for his safety to God. God protected me. He sent his angel. Guys, think about how insane Daniel's night was. He spent the night in a pit with lions and angels. How insane is that? What are the incredible things that God is going to show you? What are the incredible experiences that God is going to give you if you would simply choose obedience to him over everything else? Because Daniel got lions and angels. God is ready to show us incredible things. God is ready to show us how he will show up, but we have to choose allegiance to him above everything else. The king is exceedingly glad, but I want to point out that in verse 23, it tells us that Daniel was protected not because he was perfect, not because he got 7 quiet times that week. It says that Daniel was protected because he trusted God. We have to stop falling into the temptation towards legalism that says that God will do what we want him to do if we uphold our end with perfection. If we get 7 quiet times this week, if we break that sin struggle, if we have a discipler and we're discipling someone else. That if we become perfect, God has to show up. We need to stop striving for perfection. And guys, if that's you, trust me, I'm right there with you. I struggle with legalism all the time. In fact, this morning, as I was meeting with AJ Gonzalez, he was pointing out to me, hey, here's some areas where you're falling into legalism a little bit. I was like, okay, I got this. I'm going to cool it just a little bit. We're not called to strive for perfection. We're called to strive to be with Jesus. Let me show you the difference between those two. Striving for perfection means being satisfied that I did my quiet time today. Being satisfied that I have a discipler and I'm discipling someone else. Being satisfied that I didn't give in to this sin struggle today. Getting angry, lashing out at someone, giving into porn, whatever it is. I'm satisfied that I didn't give into that sin struggle today. Or I'm satisfied that I don't use bad language anymore. I've become sanctified in the language that I use. That's what striving for perfection looks like. All those things are good things, but our motives and our focus is wrong. Striving after Jesus looks like coming to my quiet time, not to check a box, but just to sit with Jesus even when I'm distracted, tired, or discouraged. It's to say, Jesus, I don't know what you want to tell me. If anything, I'm just here to be with you. It's inviting others into my life, not so I can say, yeah, I'm being discipled by this person, but because I recognize that I actually need help learning to follow Jesus. If you're being discipled by someone, let me ask you, when was the last time that you actually listened and followed the directions that they gave you? If you're in discipleship and you're not actually asking for help, if you're not actually asking for leadership, then you're wasting your time. Stop doing things just to feel like you're doing something spiritual. Recognize you actually do need help and go ask for help because you desire to follow Jesus, not because you want to be perfect. Striving for Jesus means fighting sin, not so I can feel clean or impressive, but because I love Jesus and I don't want anything to pull my heart away from him. Striving for Jesus means repenting quickly when I fail, not hiding in the shame or trying to fix it myself, but instead running to Jesus. Striving for Jesus means measuring my life not by how well I perform, but how deeply I trust him. Guys, your goal is not a perfected version of yourself. Your goal is a dependent, trusting relationship with him. The focus is him, not you. Stop focusing on yourself and striving for perfection. Just strive after Jesus and watch him begin to sanctify you. Watch him make you like himself. Watch him make you more perfect. He is able to do what you are not. Daniel has his faith settled, and it cost him something. Could have cost him his life. So what happens as a result of Daniel choosing his allegiance to God? Point number 3, displayed faith. But not by Daniel. Look with me at verse 25. Then King Darius wrote to all the peoples, the nations, and the languages that dwell in all the earth, and he said, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion, people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. Why? For he is a living God. He's enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed. His dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and he rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. Then verse 28, so Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. As a result of Daniel's faithfulness to God, an opportunity showed up for God to make himself known. So what does Darius tell people about this God? He tells them, I have witnessed it. God is alive and present. He is powerful. There is nothing above him. He cannot be overcome. He protects his people, and he does incredible things. Why does this decree go out? What caused Darius to proclaim this to the entire known world? It's because he saw God do something incredible. Why did he get to see God do something incredible? Because Daniel chose to be faithful to God, even when it cost him something. So guys, when it costs you something, when it's hard, instead of asking, God, where are you? What are you doing? Getting frustrated in the face of our circumstances, what if instead we recognize that we might just be right in the place that God intends to show up? Not only to show himself to us, but to show himself to others. What if when people persecute us, we were actually to believe Jesus' words in Matthew 5:11 and 12 when he says, you are actually blessed by God when you're persecuted for my sake. Why? Because God intends to use you for something incredible. This is how we get the mindset of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah to say, even if. Guys, listen. We are in Babylon. As you go into your schools, as you go into your workplaces, sometimes as you go home, we are in Babylon. We're in a culture that pushes against our faith. But we're called to live faithfully to God even when it costs us something. Not so we can feel good about ourselves, but so that we can actually fulfill the purpose for which we were created. What is your purpose? Your purpose is to know God and to make God known. When we choose faithfulness to God, even when it costs us something, we fulfill exactly that. One, we get to know God because we watch him show up, and we get to make God known because we point others to him in every circumstance that we face. We get to know God and make him known. We are in Babylon. When it costs you something, where does your loyalty?